pour the milk, rib open 64 and 5. B, pour the milk, rib open 64 and 5. B, pour the milk, rib open 64 and 5. B, pour the milk, rib open 64 and 5. B, pour the milk, rib open 64 and 5. B, pour the milk, rib open 64 and 5.
Hey everybody, welcome to Chapter 9, Lesson 4 on the Civil Rights Movement. I'm not Mr. Knorr.
And I'm not Mr. Pinka.
Those are both true sentences. Your notes here, this is
Pivot per milk.
PB, pour the milk,
64 and 5.
rip open, 64 and 5.
PB, pour the milk, rip
The
open.
worst mnemonic
64
I've ever
and
thought
5.
of.
I like it.
Some effects of segregation. These are kind of a repeat of the Jim Crow stuff, but here in a mnemonic form. Fire. So facilities were separate. Isolation of the races. Restrooms, drinking fountains, and restaurants. And educational resources were separate for white and African American students. So you know that. That's the Jim Crow stuff that we've talked about throughout the year. Now we're going to try and get rid of Jim Crow. PB.
Plessy versus Ferguson.
These are the two big Supreme Court cases that you have to know.
Brown versus Board of Education.
Plessy versus Ferguson, you already know that one. There's Homer Plessy in the train car. The separate but equal. Whenever you hear Plessy versus Ferguson, from now till you graduate from college, and then beyond that, Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. The case that the Civil Rights Movement opposed. This is the one that kind of makes Jim Crow okay. So you kind of have to attack that. And one of the cases that did the most to undo Plessy versus Ferguson is Brown versus the Board of Education. It resulted in the desegregation of schools.
Which meant kids could now go together to the same place, the same school.
We're going to see two approaches to the Civil Rights Movement. One is the battle being fought in the courts, and one is the battle being fought for public perception. So there's protests, and there's also the NAACP fighting in the Supreme Courts and in the district courts.
And one of the big reasons that this works at this time is television, again, which the technology that comes into play historically is really going to change things. And so people can see what's going on television for the first time. They can't hide from it anymore.
So these are two cases you have to know. That's the PB. Then the PR, passive resistance, also known as the weapon of love. It's the method used by the Civil Rights Movement. This is on TV when you see somebody who's using passive, nonviolent resistance. It's very persuasive.
And don't try to pull this in our classroom like, Mr. Knorr, I'm just resisting. I'm not going to do the work passively. It's my weapon of love. Don't go pulling that on me. It's not going to get you anywhere.
The key element there is love.
Yeah.
But when you have fire hoses that can tear the bark off a tree, break bones, when you see high schoolers being hit with fire hoses, it makes them seem sympathetic, and it makes the person with the fire hose seem wrong. And so a lot of what the movement will do is use this method to highlight the difference between their cause and the cause they're fighting against. Very effective. In fact, you could say this is historically one of the most effective ways of defeating something. And Martin Luther King Jr., the most famous practitioner of passive
In the U.S.
For us, yes. One of the leaders of the movement gave his I Have a Dream speech during the March for a Civil Rights Act.
And that was in Washington, D.C. That was years down the road, though. He had been in this battle for quite a while before this actually takes place.
And Rosa Parks, she helped lead the Montgomery bus boycott to end segregated busing in Alabama.
And that's when she and Martin Luther King Jr. become famous at the same time, in the same place. Two completely unknowns outside of their local community become two of the most famous Americans.
And that visual right there, that's again part of that passive nonviolent resistance, is when you see a woman there who she could be your mother, she could be your grandmother, but like when you see her being arrested, you don't have to know a whole lot about that context to know whose side you would probably be on there. Like, why is that person arresting grandma? Like, what could she have done wrong? Why is she wearing a number there? Why is she having a mugshot taken?
And why does it take that guy 2 hands to hold that one finger? How strong is she?
Yeah, so she's famous for sitting in a part of the bus when she was asked to move. She was sitting in the middle of the bus in what's called no man's land, but she was asked to give up her seat for a white customer.
Even though there was another seat available right across from her.
She decided that she would not move, and she was arrested for that.
And other women had done that before, but she's the one they will rally around, and it will start the change of everything.
Right. So she's the Montgomery bus boycott is kind of the beginning of this movement organizing. And man, what could they have done if they had Twitter back then?
Yeah.
Organized protest. So this is the Freedom Riders, sit-ins, marches. These are the methods they use to protest. These are the nonviolent, passive nonviolent forms of protest. Freedom Riders, the idea is you get on a bus with black students, white students, all friends, all working together. They charter a bus, they rent a bus, and they drive across the South in a very provocative way. Like, they are intentionally putting whites in the back and blacks in the front to provoke a response, and they get a response.
But the law at that time said that they could do that. If they were going from state to state, you could sit where you wanted. But the South and the Southerners didn't care, and they will attack and firebomb and beat up people, firebomb the buses, and this again will be on the news.
So this is the one that the sit-ins will be illegal, but the Freedom Riders, they're not breaking a law. They're doing what they're allowed to do, but they're doing it in a provocative way to call attention to people. And the marches, another organized form of protest, that they're bringing all these things together. This is the expansion of the NAACP.
The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Oh!
Yes, you're right. That is what it is.
I caught that. That's awesome.
So the organized protests are the public image, the fighting the public perception, changing people's hearts and their minds, but then you're also changing the law. So actually, you could probably say that between Booker T. Washington and W.E. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington would probably be the change their hearts and their minds, persuade them with your role model, and then who would support this?
The guy who started W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yeah, I imagine he probably is a fan of the NAACP since he did found it. So W.E.B. Du Bois, this is his approach: change the law. Like, forget their hearts, their minds, change the law. So the NAACP is fighting the law,
Or at least have them obey the original laws.
fighting for the law's enforcement.
Yeah.
Like saying your job is to protect the Freedom Riders. So those things work together. And the fruits of these of the movement, the two biggest pieces of legislation that they helped pass, it all comes together in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is the act that makes Jim Crow and segregation illegal. And I put in there that it echoes the 14th Amendment. So if you're having a hard time with which one is 64 and which one is 65, the 14th Amendment is the one that guarantees equal protection, equal treatment for all. And this is what the 64 Civil Rights Act is trying to encourage, there is no separate but equal. It's all gone. Not on buses, not in lunch counters, not in schools. It's all gone. So they've been fighting these battles over lunch counters, over the Freedom Riders, over marches, and now this is just across the board, segregation is done.
And if you have a hard time remembering those two, the next one will help you remember which one's which.
Okay.
Because 65.
And 65. So the Voting Rights Act of 65 echoes the 15th Amendment. So that, if you remember, the 15th Amendment was about giving all men the right to vote. And this is about protecting the rights of African Americans to vote. Because, well, why would you need this after? Wouldn't the end of Jim Crow, wouldn't that be enough? Like, women can vote, men can vote. Why would you need this act?
Because they still couldn't always do it.
the same reason that you would pass a 15th Amendment, because whatever gains you may have gained by the 14th Amendment, equal protection, equal treatment, you will lose those rights if you cannot vote. So the right to vote is what guarantees what came before. So without the Voting Rights Act of 65, the the Civil Rights Act of 64 can probably be undone. Just like, how do they get around the 14th Amendment? Jim Crow.
Yep.
Without the Voting Rights Act of 65, they'll find a way around the Civil Rights Act of 64. Now, recently, the Voting Rights Act has been, I guess, kind of undone. It's been seen as no longer necessary. So that's a thing you can probably have an opinion about or ask a question about that. But that's the end of our lesson on this. Write down 2 questions you have or more, and write down an opinion you have about these things we're talking about. Have a good day.
Pour the milk crib, open 64 and free. 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 Pour the milk crib, open 64 and free.